The bakery on East Broughton Street opened at 6, and by 6:15, a woman in a beige blazer was standing at the counter with both hands pressed flat on a pink pastry box. She told the clerk she needed to cancel. Her voice was steady. Her knuckles were white. The clerk said the deposit was non-refundable. The woman nodded once, slid the box back across the counter, and did not take the receipt. 3 feet behind her, a man in a worn leather jacket stood holding a paper cup of coffee, watching. He did not move. He did not speak. The woman turned and walked past him toward the door without looking up. He watched her go. Then he looked at the pink box still sitting on the counter and set his coffee down beside it. What was in that box, and what this man did with it, turned into something neither of them saw coming. This is the full story, and it is worth staying for. Adam Prescott had not designed a building in 4 years. Before Savannah, before the leather jacket and the pickup truck full of drywall screws, he had been a senior structural engineer at Whitfield and Associates in Atlanta. He had signed off on high-rises. He had reviewed load calculations for a federal courthouse. His name was on 11 completed projects across the Southeast, and every one of them was still standing. Then his wife died, and the part of him that sat behind a desk and read blueprints went quiet. He did not get fired. He did not burn out. He simply stopped showing up, and when the firm called to ask what they should do with his office, he told them to box it and ship it south. That was 4 years ago. Now he lived in a rented bungalow on the east side of Savannah with his 10-year-old son, Sam, and he made his living with his hands. General contracting, renovations, drywall patches and leaky faucets, and the kind of work that let him think about joists and plumb lines instead of the things he did not want to think about. Mornings were simple. Sam would come downstairs in socks, hair flat on one side, and pull a stool up to the counter while Adam cracked eggs into a cast-iron skillet. They did not talk much during breakfast. They did not need to. Sam would eat, rinse his plate, grab his backpack, and Adam would drive him to school with the windows cracked and the radio turned low. It was routine, and routine was the scaffolding that held them both upright. Laura Henning had built her life on a smaller scaffold, but she had built it alone. She was 35, divorced, and she ran a catering business called Henning's Kitchen out of a rented commercial space 3 blocks from the bakery, where she had just canceled her son's birthday cake. The kitchen was tight: 1 convection oven, 2 prep tables, a walk-in cooler that rattled when the compressor kicked in, but it was hers in every way that mattered except the lease. Her son Tyler was 8. Quiet kid, liked baseball cards and grilled cheese sandwiches, and did not ask for much, which made it worse when Laura could not give him the things he did ask for. The cake had been one of those things. A chocolate layer cake with blue frosting and his name written across the top. She had ordered it 2 weeks ago, put down the deposit, and then watched her checking account drain to double digits after Douglas Fenton raised her rent again. Douglas Fenton was 52 years old and owned 6 commercial properties in downtown Savannah. He wore pressed shirts and drove a black SUV and sat on 2 city advisory boards. He was, by every visible measure, a respected businessman. But Douglas had been raising Laura's rent every quarter for the past year, each time by an amount that exceeded the escalation clause in her original lease. When she pushed back, he cited building maintenance costs. When she pushed harder, he stopped returning her calls. What Laura did not know, what she had no reason to know, was that Douglas wanted her building empty. Not for maintenance, not for renovation. He wanted to demolish it and build a mixed-use condominium project on the lot. And the only thing standing between his permit application and a wrecking ball was a 35-year-old woman making crab cakes in a rented kitchen. That morning, after Laura left the bakery, Adam stood at the counter for a long time. He asked the clerk what had been in the box. The clerk said it was a birthday cake, ordered 2 weeks ago, for a boy named Tyler. Adam pulled his wallet from his back pocket and paid the balance. He asked the clerk to hold the cake and told her someone would come back for it. He did not leave his name. Adam did not know Laura Henning. He did not know her son or her business or the man squeezing her out of her building. He knew only what he had seen: a woman standing at a counter, choosing between a cake and whatever else that money was supposed to cover. And he knew what that arithmetic felt like. The call came 3 days later. A woman named Laura Henning needed repair work at a commercial kitchen on Broughton Street. Leaky pipe under the prep sink. A crack running along the east load-bearing wall that had been spreading since winter. She had found Adam's number on a business card pinned to the bulletin board at the hardware store on Habersham. He showed up at 7 in the morning with a tool bag and a thermos of black coffee. Laura met him at the back door. She did not recognize him from the bakery, and he did not mention it. She walked him through the kitchen, pointing out the pipe first, then running her hand along the wall crack to show him how far it had traveled since she first noticed it in January. Adam followed the line of the crack with his eyes, dropped to one knee, pressed his thumb against the baseboard, and stood up without saying anything. Laura left him to work while she prepped for a lunch catering order, dicing onions, portioning chicken thighs, lining sheet pans with parchment. Adam fixed the pipe in 40 minutes. He replaced a corroded elbow joint, retaped the threads, and pressure tested the line before moving on. The wall took longer. He pulled back a section of plaster along the crack and examined the masonry underneath. The brick was solid, deep red, laid in a tight running bond. The mortar joints were clean and hard. He tapped the header above the doorframe with the handle of his hammer and listened to the sound it made. Dense. No give, no hollowness. He ran his palm flat along the exposed surface and held it there for several seconds, the way a doctor holds a hand against a patient's back while they breathe. This was not a deficient structure. Not even close. The bones of this building were better than 90% of the commercial stock he had evaluated in his career. He asked Laura, casually, whether the building had ever been flagged for any structural issues. She told him it had. Her landlord had filed a structural deficiency notice the previous year. Said the building needed major rehabilitation. Used it to justify the rent increases, to stop paying for maintenance, and to pressure her toward the door. Adam asked if she still had the letter. She wiped her hands on a towel, pulled a manila folder from behind the register, and handed it over. The assessment was signed by a firm called Graymark Associates and bore a Georgia PE stamp with a license number Adam did not recognize. He read the name of the firm twice. He had heard of Graymark during his years in Atlanta. They were not an engineering firm in any serious sense of the word. They were a paper mill, a company that produced whatever report the client paid for, stamped and sealed, and sent it out the door without anyone ever visiting the site. He folded the letter carefully and handed it back. He did not say what he was thinking. But that night, after Sam was in bed, Adam sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open and searched the Georgia Secretary of State's online business registry. Graymark Associates, LLC was registered at 1412 Drayton Street, Suite B, Savannah, Georgia. He typed the same address into a second search tab. The result came back under a different name, Fenton Capital Holdings, LLC. Same address, same suite number, same registered agent. Douglas Fenton's holding company and the firm that had declared Laura's building structurally deficient operated out of the same office. For days after Adam started the repair work, a black SUV pulled up to the curb outside Henning's kitchen at 8:45 in the morning. Douglas Fenton stepped out, buttoned his navy blazer, and walked in through the front door without knocking. He stood in the middle of Laura's kitchen with his hands in the pockets of his pressed slacks, looking around the room slowly, like a man appraising something he had already decided to discard. He told Laura he wanted to make this easy for both of them. He leaned against the edge of the prep table like he belonged there, like the stainless steel was already his. He said he was prepared to offer her a lease buyout, a flat payment in exchange for vacating the premises, no penalties, no questions, a clean break. He named a figure that was less than 3 months of her revenue. Laura, standing behind the prep table with a chef's knife resting on the cutting board in front of her, told him no. She told him the kitchen was her livelihood, and her name was on the door, and she was not walking away from it. Douglas nodded slowly. He said he understood. He said it was entirely her choice. Then he mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the city's commercial inspection office had been ramping up enforcement in the historic district. He said that buildings in the condition hers was intended to attract attention. He said it with half a smile, the kind that is not really a smile at all. Then he turned, walked out the front door, and pulled away from the curb without looking back. Adam arrived 20 minutes later carrying a caulk gun and a sanding block. Laura was standing behind the prep table with her hands flat on the stainless steel, staring at a spot on the wall across the room. Her posture was rigid. The knife was still on the cutting board, exactly where it had been. She did not tell him what had happened. He did not ask. But on his way in through the front entrance, he had noticed a fresh city inspection sticker on the glass, bright orange, dated that morning, with a case number he had never seen on the building before. It had not been there the day before. Someone had made a phone call, and it had not been Laura. The Chatham County Courthouse kept property records in the basement level behind a steel door marked Land Records, Public Access, organized by parcel number in metal filing cabinets that stretched the length of the room. Adam went on his lunch break. He signed the access log, gave the clerk the parcel number for Laura's building, and pulled the original file. The building was a 3-story commercial structure built in 1987 by a general contractor named Harlan Dodd, designed by a structural engineering firm out of Augusta called Ballantyne and Moore. The initial structural assessment was in the file, 12 pages, hand-typed, with calculations and load tables attached. The building had passed every inspection. No deficiencies, no flags, no recommendations for repair or remediation. The structure had been engineered to exceed Chatham County's seismic and load-bearing codes in every measurable category. Then Adam pulled Douglas Fenton's acquisition file from 2020. Douglas had purchased the building at roughly 40% below the assessed market value. The justification attached to the closing documents was a structural deficiency report produced by Graymark Associates. The report described the building as suffering from masonry deterioration, foundation settlement, inadequate load distribution, and active water infiltration requiring immediate and extensive rehabilitation. Adam read each finding and compared it to what he had seen with his own hands. Tight mortar, solid brick, headers with no deflection, a foundation that had not moved in 37 years. The Graymark report described a building that did not exist. One of them was a lie, and the lie had saved Douglas Fenton several $100,000 on the purchase price and given him a lever to squeeze every tenant in the building until they left. Adam sat in his truck outside the courthouse with the photocopies fanned across the passenger seat. The engine was off. The windows were down. He had enough to suspect fraud. He did not have enough to prove it. Not yet. Not without someone who could speak to the pattern with authority. That afternoon, he went back to Laura's kitchen to finish grouting a tile seam near the walk-in cooler. Laura brought him a plate without asking: roasted chicken, rice, collard greens, a wedge of cornbread balanced on the edge. She set it on the end of the prep table closest to where he was working and went back to her station without a word. Adam ate standing up, the plate on the counter beside his grout float. At one point he paused with the fork halfway to his mouth and started to say something. Something about the building, about Graymark, about the numbers he had just seen at the courthouse. And then he stopped. He put the fork down, picked up the grout float, and went back to the tile. He was not going to hand her half an answer. When he told her, he would tell her all of it. 2 weeks later, a city inspector knocked on the front door of Henning's kitchen at 8 in the morning with a clipboard and a yellow compliance form. He walked through the kitchen for 35 minutes, checking outlets, testing the ventilation hood, measuring clearances, photographing the breaker box. When he was done, he handed Laura the form and left without explanation. Laura read the notice standing at the counter. 30-day compliance. 11 violations. Electrical, ventilation, grease trap, hood suppression, 7 more. Each written in the kind of precise technical language that sounds airtight on paper, but is vague enough in practice to be nearly impossible to fully contest. The estimated cost to bring the kitchen into full compliance, based on 3 bids Laura got that afternoon, was north of $18,000. The lowest bid was $14,200. Laura did not have $14,000. She did not have $4,000. She stood in the middle of her kitchen at the end of the day, after the last catering pickup had gone out, holding the compliance notice in one hand and her phone in the other, and she did not move for a long time. Then she folded the notice, put it in the folder behind the register with the deficiency letter, and locked up. Adam came by the next morning. He had heard about the inspection from a plumbing supplier who serviced the whole block and had seen the orange sticker go up. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen with his hands in his jacket pockets and told Laura he would do the compliance work at cost, materials only, no labor charge. It would take him about a week. Laura shook her head before he finished the sentence. She said she was not going to owe anyone anything. She said she had been handling her own problems for 3 years. She said she had built this kitchen out of nothing and she would figure this out the same way she figured out everything else, by herself. Adam leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. He looked at the kitchen, then at her, then at the compliance notice he could see sticking out of the folder behind the register. "I am not saving you," he said. "I am fixing a wall. Same thing I have been doing since you called me 3 weeks ago. Laura held his gaze for a long moment. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She turned back to the prep station and started slicing bell peppers, and Adam walked out to his truck and began unloading materials. He started with the electrical panel, replaced the breaker box, rerouted 2 circuits that had been daisy-chained since the original build, brought the whole system to current code. Then the ventilation, new fan motor, rebalanced ductwork, airflow recalibrated above minimum. On the 3rd day, he started opening up the east wall again, the same wall where he had found the original crack. He needed to access the wiring channel behind the plaster to reroute the dedicated circuit for the new panel. He pulled back a larger section of lath and plaster, working carefully to keep the opening clean, and as the old material came away in pieces, something shifted inside the wall cavity. He reached in and pulled out a rolled tube of heavy paper, yellowed along the edges and stiff with age, tied with a piece of cotton string that crumbled when he touched it. He untied it and unrolled it slowly on the prep table, weighing down the corners with a coffee mug, a box of salt, and 2 cans of tomatoes. It was a complete set of original builder's blueprints, dated 1987, drawn in pencil on vellum, stamped by Ballantyne and more structural engineers of Augusta, Georgia. Every page was intact. Every load calculation was written out in longhand in the margins. And every specification, every beam size, every footing dimension, every rebar schedule exceeded Savannah's building code by a wide margin. Not by a few percentage points, by factors that suggested the original engineer had designed this building to last 100 years. The building was not just sound. It had been built to outlast everything around it. And someone had rolled the proof into the wall cavity nearly 40 years ago, as builders sometimes did, a record left inside the bones of their own work. Carl Jessup lived in a narrow shotgun house on East Gwinnett Street with a screened porch that faced a magnolia tree he had planted the year he retired. He had not worked for Chatham County in 6 years, but he had spent 31 years before that as a building inspector for the county's Department of Development Services, and there was not a commercial structure in the historic district whose permit history he could not recall from memory if you gave him the address and a minute to think. Adam showed up at his door on a Thursday morning with the rolled blueprints tucked under his arm and the Graymark report folded in his back pocket. Carl opened the screen door, looked at the tube of paper, and said, "You better come in." He poured 2 cups of coffee in the kitchen, cleared a stack of fishing magazines off the table, and spread the blueprints across the surface. He put on a pair of reading glasses and studied them page by page, tracing the structural details with the tip of a pencil, pausing at the load tables, flipping back to compare foundation specs with roof framing. He did this for 15 minutes without saying a word. Then he sat back, took off his glasses, and folded his hands on the table. "This building is not just adequate," Carl said. "Under Chapter 8 of the Municipal Code, the Historic Preservation Ordinance, a structure with these engineering standards, these materials, and this level of original documentation qualifies for preliminary historic designation. If that designation goes through, demolition is blocked. Period. You would need a full historic review, a public comment window, and a 2/3 vote from the Preservation Board just to start the conversation about tearing it down." Adam pulled out the Graymark report and laid it beside the blueprints. Carl read it in under 3 minutes. When he finished, he set it down on the table and tapped it once with his index finger. "I know this firm," he said. "I have seen their name on reports for 3 other Finnan properties, all acquired between 2019 and 2021, all purchased below market value, all justified by deficiency assessments from Graymark." He paused. "I suspected it at the time, but I was already retired. I had no standing to request a review, and nobody at the county was looking." He got up, walked to the hallway, and pulled a folder from a filing cabinet wedged between the linen closet and the bathroom door. Inside were his personal notes on 3 Fenton-owned buildings, addresses, acquisition dates, sale prices, and the Graymark report numbers. Every acquisition followed the same pattern. Carl set the folder on the table next to the blueprints. "He has been running this play for years," he said. "Bad report, cheap buy, full rent, squeeze the tenants out, tear it down, build condos. The tenants never see the engineering reports. They just know the rent keeps climbing and the landlord keeps telling them the building is falling apart." Adam drove straight to Laura's kitchen that afternoon. She was scrubbing the flat-top grill with a pumice block, her sleeves pushed up past her elbows, when he came through the back door carrying the blueprints and Carl's folder. He set them on the prep table and told her to sit down. Laura wiped her hands on a towel, pulled up a stool, and sat. Adam laid it out. All of it. The Graymark report and how it contradicted every physical detail of the building he had examined with his own hands. The shared address between Graymark Associates and Fenton Capital Holdings. The acquisition price, 40% below market, made possible by the fraudulent assessment. The original blueprints showing the building exceeded code in every category. Carl Jessup's records documenting the same pattern across 3 other Fenton properties. And the historic preservation statute that could block demolition permanently. Laura sat with her hands on the edge of the prep table. She looked at the blueprints. She looked at the Graymark report. She looked at the folder full of Carl's notes. She was quiet for nearly a minute. When she spoke, her voice was low and even. He did not just raise my rent, she said. He never should have owned this building in the first place. Adam nodded. You do not need to fight him on the rent anymore. You need to file. Laura filed the first complaint on a Monday morning. She walked into the Chatham County District Attorney's office on Montgomery Street wearing the same beige blazer she had worn in the bakery, carrying a folder that weighed more than it looked. Inside was the original 1987 blueprints, the Graymark deficiency report, printed screenshots showing the shared address between Graymark Associates and Fenton Capital Holdings, and a notarized 3-page statement from Carl Jessup detailing his observations on 3 additional Fenton properties and the consistent use of Graymark assessments to manipulate acquisition prices. The intake clerk reviewed the materials, stamped the file, and told Laura someone from the Economic Crimes Division would contact her within 2 weeks. That same afternoon, Adam drove to the Savannah Historic District Board of Review office on East Broughton Street and filed a formal petition requesting an emergency structural assessment of Laura's building for preliminary historic designation under Chapter 8 of the Municipal Preservation Code. He attached his own professional structural evaluation, the first document he had signed with his PE license number in 4 years, alongside the original blueprints and a 12-page comparison showing every point at which the Graymark report contradicted the physical evidence and the original engineering specifications. The clerk at the review board looked at the thickness of the filing and asked if he wanted a receipt. Adam said yes. Douglas Fenton found out within 48 hours. He appeared at Adam's workshop on Victory Drive at the end of the day, standing in the open bay door with his arms crossed and his SUV idling behind him in the gravel lot while Adam swept sawdust off the concrete floor. You have no idea what you just stepped into, Douglas said. Adam kept sweeping. He moved the broom in slow, even strokes, pushing the dust toward the drain in the center of the floor. I have been building in this city for 20 years, Douglas continued. I sit on 2 advisory boards. I know every contractor, every inspector, every supplier south of Forsyth Park. One phone call, and you will not get hired to hang drywall in somebody's garage. Adam stopped sweeping. He leaned the broom against the workbench and turned to face Douglas for the first time. His expression was flat. No anger. No performance. I already sent copies to 3 offices, he said. The DA, the Preservation Board, and the State Licensing Commission that certifies professional engineers in Georgia. Your firm signed a fraudulent structural assessment and used it to acquire property below market value. That is not a lease dispute. That is a felony. Douglas stood in the bay door for another 5 seconds, his jaw working, and then he turned, walked to his SUV, and pulled out of the lot without closing the door. 2 days later, Laura's attorney received notice that Douglas had filed an expedited demolition permit for the Broughton Street property, an attempt to get the building down before the Preservation Board could process the historic review petition. Adam called Laura from his truck. Laura called her attorney from the kitchen. By 3 that afternoon, they had filed for an emergency temporary restraining order through Chatham County Superior Court. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. The judge reviewed Douglas's permit application, Adam's preservation petition, the pending DA complaint, and the original blueprints spread across the council table. She issued a temporary restraining order halting all demolition activity on the property until the historic review process was complete. Douglas Fenton's wrecking ball was not coming. Not today. Not this month. Not until a board of 7 people reviewed the evidence and voted, and Adam already knew what the evidence would tell them. The Historic District Board of Review convened a special session on the second Tuesday of the following month in a ground-floor meeting room at City Hall. 7 board members sat behind a curved table. Adam stood at the lectern with the blueprints mounted on a display easel beside him. He had not stood in front of a review panel in 4 years, and his voice was flat and technical and entirely without performance. He walked the board through the original engineering specifications page by page. Load-bearing capacities, mortar composition, rebar schedules, seismic bracing, foundation depth. He showed them the Graymark report side by side with the blueprints and identified 11 specific findings in the deficiency assessment that were physically impossible given the building's actual construction. He presented his own structural evaluation and the photographs he had taken during the wall repair. He spoke for 32 minutes. And he spoke the way a man speaks about something he knows so deeply it has become part of his posture, without emphasis, without persuasion, without anything but the facts lined up in order. The board voted 6-1 to grant preliminary historic designation. Demolition was blocked indefinitely. A full review would take a minimum of 18 months, and even then, the evidence Adam had presented made reversal unlikely. 3 days after the vote, the DA's office opened a formal investigation into Douglas Fenton's property acquisitions across Chatham County. Subpoenas went out to Graymark Associates, to Fenton Capital Holdings, and to the county clerk's office for all transaction records involving Fenton-owned properties between 2018 and 2022. Within a week, 2 other tenants in Douglas's buildings came forward independently. A florist on Abercorn Street who had received a deficiency notice and watched her rent climb by 30% in 18 months. An accountant on Habersham Street whose office ceiling had been leaking for a year while Douglas refused to make repairs, citing the building's structural limitations. Both had been pressured to vacate. Both had the same Graymark letterhead in their files. Laura's 30-day compliance notice was rescinded by the city within 10 days of the DA's announcement. The violations had been filed through the same inspection chain that relied on Graymark's deficiency findings, and with those findings under investigation, the enforcement basis collapsed. A court-appointed property trustee assumed management of the Broughton Street building, and Laura received a new lease at fair market rate, backdated 14 months to cover the overcharges she had been paying since Douglas began his escalation. She stood in her kitchen the morning the new lease document arrived by certified mail. She held the single page in both hands and read it twice, standing in the same spot where she had once stood holding the compliance notice. Then she folded it, put it in the drawer beneath the register, and turned on the convection oven to preheat for a lunch order. The weeks after the lease came through were quieter than anything that had come before. The kind of quiet that settles after a long storm when the air changes and the light shifts and everything looks the same but feels like it has been set back on level ground. Adam brought Sam by the kitchen on a Saturday afternoon to pick up a catering tray for a neighbor's cookout. Tyler was sitting at the far end of the prep table with his baseball cards fanned out in front of him, sorting them into stacks by team. Sam walked over without being told, looked at the cards for a moment, and sat down across from him. Tyler slid a stack toward him. Sam started sorting. Neither of them said anything for the first several minutes, and then Tyler held up a card and pointed to the batting average on the back, and Sam leaned in to look, and that was enough. They were fine. They did not need introductions or instructions or any of the scaffolding that adults build around the simple act of 2 kids sitting at a table together. Adam and Laura stood near the back door of the kitchen, half watching the boys and half watching the alley behind the building where the afternoon light was turning the brick wall across the way a deep orange. Adam held the catering tray in both hands. Laura had her arms crossed, one shoulder against the doorframe. "Thank you," she said. Not loud, not heavy, just 2 words set down between them the way she might set a plate on a table, simply, without ceremony. Adam shifted the tray to one hand. "I just read a wall." Laura was quiet for a moment. The sound of the boys talking about batting averages drifted from the prep table. Then she asked him why he had left engineering. Adam looked through the doorway at Sam, then down at the tray, then at a point somewhere past the building across the alley. "My wife died 4 years ago," he said. "After that I could not sit behind a desk and look at drawings anymore. I needed to touch the work, hold it in my hands, feel it stay where I put it." Laura did not say she was sorry. She did not say she understood. She did not try to fill what he had said with anything that might make it smaller. She stood next to him in the doorway and let the quiet do what quiet does when two people trusted enough to leave it alone. Tyler's birthday party was held in the kitchen on a Sunday afternoon in October. Laura had cleared the prep tables and pushed them against the walls. There were paper plates and a folding table in the center covered with a blue tablecloth Tyler had picked out himself. His baseball cards were fanned out along one end like decorations, and someone had taped a hand-lettered banner to the ventilation hood that read, "Happy Birthday, Tyler," in crooked blue marker. Sam was there. He and Tyler were standing near the walk-in cooler, sorting cards, talking about batting averages with the easy rhythm of boys who had known each other for weeks and already acted like it had been years. There were 8 people at the party. A few parents from Tyler's school. Carl Jessup, who brought a paper bag of peaches from his side yard. The clerk from the bakery on Broughton Street, who had closed early and walked over with a box of butter cookies. Laura came out of the back, carrying a cake box. She set it on the center of the table. A pink bakery box, same bakery, same shade of pink, same size, and she opened the lid. Inside was a chocolate layer cake with blue frosting and Tyler's name written across the top in clean block letters. Exactly the cake she had ordered months ago and walked away from at the counter. She looked up from the box and found Adam across the room. He was leaning against the far wall with his arms folded, one boot crossed over the other, watching. He met her gaze and nodded. Just once. Small, barely visible. The kind of nod that carries 4 months of early mornings and plaster dust and county filings and one quiet payment at a bakery counter that she had never been told about, but had somehow, at some point, figured out. Tyler blew out the candles. Sam clapped. Carl cut the first slice and announced that this was the earned right of anyone over 55 who showed up with peaches. The kitchen filled with the small, ordinary noise of people eating cake off paper plates and talking about nothing in particular, and for a while that was all there was. Later, after the boys had taken their plates outside to the alley behind the kitchen where the late afternoon light was still warm on the brick, Laura found Adam standing near the east wall. The wall he had repaired. The wall that had held the blueprints for 37 years and had held the building up for just as long. She was holding a small frame, oak, thin, with a section of the original 1987 blueprint matted on white linen behind glass. The east wall's load-bearing specifications. Pencil on vellum. The Ballantine and more stamp in the lower right corner. "You found this in my wall," she said. "Figured it should go on yours." Adam took the frame with both hands. He looked at the pencil lines on the vellum. Careful, deliberate marks drawn nearly 40 years ago by someone who had done the math and chosen the materials and built something meant to last. And it had lasted. The building had held. The proof had survived inside its own walls. And a man who had stopped reading blueprints had walked in one morning and read one more. He looked at Laura. She looked back. The pink box sat open on the table behind them. Empty now, nothing inside but crumbs and a thin smear of blue frosting along the cardboard bottom. The kitchen was warm and full of the sound of boys laughing in the alley and October air coming through the propped open back door. "Some things hold," Adam said quietly. "You just have to look close enough to see it." Laura did not answer. She stepped forward and stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, both of them facing the east wall. The building stood around them, solid and unchanged, the way it had stood for 37 years and would stand for 37 more. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to.